2:15 in the morning. The Arctic Ocean. The USS Indiana was already deep beneath the pack ice when the first signal arrived. This was not a routine patrol. The Virginia-class attack submarine was operating in a region of the Arctic that was supposed to be empty. It was a vast and frozen desert of salt water. Somewhere above the steel hull, 2 meters of solid ice separated the crew from the freezing atmosphere. Below them, the continental shelf dropped into a black abyss nearly 4,000 meters deep. Commander Robert Miller stood in the center of the Combat Information Center. The room was bathed in a dim blue light to protect the night vision of the watchstanders. It was a quiet space. The only sounds were the low hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic breathing of 40 men and women at their stations. Miller looked at the master navigation plot. They were 300 miles north of the Alaskan coast. The sonar supervisor spoke first. Bridge, sonar, new contact, bearing 045, range unknown. Miller moved to the sonar suite. He stood behind a young technician who was staring intensely at a waterfall display. The screen was filled with cascading lines of green data. Usually, this far north, the display showed nothing but the grinding of ice and the occasional song of a whale. The technician pointed to a thin, jagged line on the screen. "Sir, I have a narrowband signature. It is faint, but it is consistent." Miller leaned in. "Classify it. Is it a foreign military vessel?" The technician shook his head. His brow was furrowed. "Negative, sir. I am running the signature through the library now. It does not match any known foreign hull. In fact, it does not match anything in our database." "Is it biological?" Miller asked. The technician paused. He adjusted his headset. "No, sir. This is mechanical. But the frequency is strange. It is vibrating at exactly 60 hertz. That is the same frequency as our own onboard electrical systems." 2:22 in the morning. The atmosphere in the room shifted. A mechanical sound that mimicked their own ship was not just an anomaly. It was a provocation. Miller knew that foreign military forces were active in the area. The enemy vessels were known to haunt these waters. But this sound was different. It was too clean. It lacked the cavitation and the mechanical grinding associated with standard propellers. The sonar supervisor spoke again. "Sir, the contact is shifting. It is now at bearing 040. It is moving toward the shelf. Fast." "How fast?" Miller asked. 40 knots, maybe more." Miller felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic water. No submarine in the world could move at 40 knots while remaining that quiet. The naval warship was one of the most advanced pieces of technology ever built by human hands. At that speed, the ship would sound like a freight train. This contact was a ghost. The commander turned to his executive officer. "Rig for ultra quiet. I want every man in his bunk. No dropped wrenches. We are going to find out what is making that noise." 2:30 in the morning. The naval warship began to slow. Her massive propulsor turned more slowly. The submarine became a shadow in the deep. Miller watched the display. The contact had stopped moving. It was sitting perfectly still at 2,000 meters. It was hovering just above the seafloor in a region where the pressure was enough to crush a lesser vessel. Miller looked at the screen. It was a steady, rhythmic pulse. It felt like a heartbeat. The commander realized then that they were not alone in the dark. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:40 in the morning. The Arctic Ocean, 10 miles east of the American position. The Russian Kazan-class submarine Severodvinsk moved like a predator through the deep. It was the pride of the Northern Fleet, a heavy, sophisticated hunter designed to vanish in the cold. Inside the command deck, Captain Viktor Orlov watched the digital displays. He was a man of few words and long silences. The air inside the submarine was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and machine oil. The sonar technician, Senior Lieutenant Volkov, pressed his palms against his headset. He looked at his captain with a pale face. "Captain, I have a contact at bearing 280. It is not the American. It is something else. It is not the American. It is something else." Orlov crossed the deck in 3 strides. "Explain." "We have been tracking the American Virginia class for 2 hours. Is this a second vessel?" Volkov shook his head. No. The American is still there. But this new contact has appeared between us. It is sitting at 2,000 meters. It is directly on the shelf. Orlov looked at the acoustic waterfall. Is it a drone? A stationary sensor? Volkov adjusted a dial. The green lines on his screen jumped. I do not think so, sir. The acoustic signature is impossible. It is broadcasting a low-frequency pulse at exactly 50 Hz. That is the frequency of our own electrical grid. It is mimicking the Severodvinsk. 2:50 in the morning. The Russian crew fell into a tense silence. In the world of submarine warfare, sound is identity. A submarine that broadcasts your own signature is a psychological weapon. It is a mirror designed to confuse. To a sonar operator, it felt like looking into a dark room and seeing your own face staring back. Orlov spoke in a low voice. Do the Americans have a system that can record and play back our signature in real time? Not like this, Volkov replied. This is not a recording. It is a perfect synchronization. When we throttle up, the contact throttles up. When we slow down, it matches us. It is as if the water itself has become our shadow. Inside the American submarine Indiana, Commander Miller was reaching the same conclusion. His sonar team was reporting a 60 Hz signal, the American standard. Both captains were now staring at a contact that appeared to be a perfect copy of their own ships. 3 o'clock in the morning. The anomaly shifted again. On both the American and Russian sonar screens, the signal began to expand. It was no longer a single point. It was becoming a wall. A massive acoustic barrier was rising from the sea floor. Inside the Severodvinsk, the lights flickered. It was a momentary dip in power. Orlov looked at his chief engineer. Report, Orlov commanded. The engineer looked at his console. I cannot explain it, Captain. We had a momentary surge in the secondary bus. All systems are back to normal. But something just drew a massive amount of power from our reactor. Our output dropped by 15% for 3 seconds. 10 miles away, the Indiana experienced the exact same phenomenon. Both nuclear reactors, the most complex power sources on the planet, had been tapped like a battery. Orlov looked back at the sonar screen. The contact was no longer sitting still. It was accelerating. It was moving directly toward the midpoint between the two submarines. He is coming for us, Volkov whispered. Orlov gripped the edge of the chart table. His knuckles were white. Battle stations. Prepare to flood tubes 1 and 2. If this is an American provocation, they will find we are not easy prey. Neither captain knew that the other was experiencing the same terror. Neither knew that the thing in the water was not listening to them. It was feeding on them. The abyss was no longer empty. It was hungry. 3:15 in the morning. The USS Indiana. Commander Miller watched the power levels on his console stabilize, but the sonar display was worse. The jagged green line that mirrored the Indiana had grown. It was now a thick wall of white noise. The acoustic signature was so loud, it was beginning to vibrate the hull of the submarine. It felt like the ocean was humming. The sonar supervisor looked at Miller. His voice was tight. Sir, whatever is out there is now drawing power directly from our environment. My sensors are overloaded. I cannot see anything beyond 500 meters. Miller made a decision. He was responsible for a $2 billion vessel and 130 lives. He could not fight an enemy he could not classify. He could not even see it. The commander turned to the officer of the deck. We are withdrawing. Come about to bearing 180. Increase speed to 15 knots. Take us down to 1,000 feet. I want distance between us and that shelf. The executive officer looked surprised. Sir, we have not completed the mission. We have not identified the contact. Miller looked at the flickering lights. The mission is compromised. This is not a submarine. It is something else. We are leaving. 3:25 in the morning. The Severodvinsk. Captain Orlov reached the same conclusion. His chief engineer reported that the reactor was experiencing thermal fluctuations that should be impossible. The Russian submarine was being drained of its energy. The mysterious 50 Hz signal was now a physical presence. The crew could feel it in their teeth. Orlov spoke into the internal comms. All stations. This is the captain. We are initiating an emergency withdrawal. Bearing 090. Full speed. Cavitation is authorized. The Russian submarine groaned as its powerful engines pushed it forward. The silence of the Arctic was shattered by the roar of the Russian propellers. Orlov did not care about stealth anymore. He wanted to get his men away from the anomaly. 3:40 in the morning. Colorado Springs, Colorado. Inside the mountain fortress of the North American Aerospace Defense Command, a row of analysts watched their screens. They were monitoring remote acoustic sensors scattered across the Arctic floor. These sensors were designed to detect the smallest sound. Now, they were lighting up like a Christmas tree. A senior analyst pointed to a screen showing two distinct acoustic blooms. General, we have two high-speed departures. One is a Virginia class, the other is a Russian Kazan. They are moving in opposite directions at maximum speed. The Air Force general stepped closer. Did they engage? The analyst shook his head. We did not detect a torpedo launch. But something happened at those coordinates. Both vessels are running as if they are being chased. They are not following a standard withdrawal pattern. This is a flight. 3:45 in the morning. Severodvinsk, Russia. The headquarters of the Russian Northern Fleet was in a state of controlled panic. Their long-range sensors showed the same thing. The Russian submarine was fleeing the area at 40 knots. It was a speed that risked damaging the propulsion system. An admiral stared at the tactical plot. The Americans have used a new weapon. They have forced our most advanced submarine to retreat. This is an act of war. Neither command center could see the anomaly. The mysterious object at the bottom of the ocean was silent to the remote sensors. All the generals saw were two nuclear-armed predators, running away from a blank spot on the map. To the military mind, there was only one explanation. One side had tried to kill the other. The orders began to flow. In the United States and Russia, crews were woken up. Missiles were fueled. The shadow of a total conflict began to fall over the ice. 4 o'clock in the morning. The Norwegian Sea. The USS Arleigh Burke-class destroyer cut through 10-foot swells. It was moving at 30 knots. 200 miles to the north, the USS Indiana was still running silent, but the surface fleet was no longer hiding. The destroyer was the lead vessel of a surface strike group racing toward the last known coordinates of the American submarine. The captain stood in the Combat Information Center. The room smelled of ozone and stale coffee. The air was thick with the tension of a crew that had been at battle stations for an hour. The tactical action officer spoke. Captain, we have orders from Second Fleet. We are to establish a defensive screen. Anything that crosses the 75th parallel is to be considered hostile. The Russians have moved 3 ships out of the Barents Sea. The captain looked at the radar screen. Confirm. Are we weapons-free? The officer responded. Negative. We are at condition yellow. Do not fire unless fired upon, but keep the fire control radar active. I want the Russians to know we are looking at them. 4:15 in the morning. The Barents Sea. The Russian frigate Admiral Kasatonov was pushing its engines to the limit. Thick black smoke trailed from its funnels into the freezing air. To the west, a squadron of 142 Bear maritime patrol aircraft was already airborne. They were screaming across the sky at 400 miles per hour. Their mission was to find the American submarine that had supposedly chased the Severodvinsk. The Russian commander spoke into a secure radio line. Northern Fleet Command. This is Guardian 1. We are 10 minutes from the intercept zone. The command voice was cold. Guardian 1. The Russians have engaged our submarine. You are authorized to use active sonar. Locate the USS Indiana. Do not let it escape the ice. The commander replied. Copy. We are pinging now. 4:25 in the morning. The Pentagon. The National Military Command Center was at a fever pitch. A wall of monitors showed the Arctic Circle. Icons for dozens of ships and aircraft were converging on a single point. It was a digital map of a coming disaster. A brigadier general leaned over a desk. What is the status of the Indiana? A colonel answered, She is at 1,000 feet. Speed is 20 knots. She is not responding to blue-green laser communications. We think her sensors are still degraded from the anomaly. She is blind to the surface. The general shook his head. The Russians think we attacked the Severodvinsk. They are moving their surface assets to block the Indiana from reaching open water. This is a trap, the colonel spoke again. Sir, if they lock onto our submarine, the Indiana will defend herself. We are 5 minutes away from a shooting war. The rules of engagement are too ambiguous. The commanders on the scene are going to make the call. 4:30 in the morning. The distance between the two fleets was closing. On the surface, the American and Russian ships were now within 30 nautical miles of each other. Below the ice, the two submarines were still retreating, but they were no longer the only actors in the theater. The Russian frigate activated its active sonar. The sound was a massive, rhythmic hammer blow that traveled hundreds of miles through the water. It was a declaration of intent. It found the USS Indiana. Inside the American submarine, the sonar pings hit the hull like physical strikes. The commander of the Indiana spoke. They have found us. Ready the countermeasures. If they drop a torpedo, we fire back. The world was holding its breath. The ice was about to break. 4:45 in the morning. The Beaufort Sea. An American Pate Poseidon aircraft banked hard over the white expanse. Its jet engines roared in the thin, freezing air. Below, the ice was a cracked mosaic of white and deep blue. The crew was not looking at the horizon. They were watching their acoustic processors. They were hunting. 50 miles to the west, a Russian Tu-142 Bear was doing the same. Its massive counter-rotating propellers created a vibration that could be felt through the ice itself. The two aircraft were the eyes of their respective fleets. They were the first to commit to the hunt. The American mission commander spoke into his headset. Deploy the first string of sonobuoys. I want a wall of sound from the continental shelf to the deep water. The sensor technician responded. Copy. Dropping sequence 1 through 8 now. Small cylinders punched out of the belly of the Pate. They drifted down on small parachutes. Some shattered against the ice. Others found the narrow leads of open water and sank into the black depths. Once submerged, they extended their long hydrophone arrays. The Arctic was no longer silent. It was a forest of electronic ears. 5 o'clock in the morning. The sonobuoys were picking up a chaotic symphony of noise. They recorded the churning propellers of the Russian frigates. They captured the high-speed whine of the American destroyers. And they found the low, steady thrum of the two retreating submarines. The USS Indiana and the Severodvinsk were no longer ghosts. They were targets. Inside the Russian Bear aircraft, the sensor operator identified the American submarine. I have the Indiana, bearing 160. She is attempting to hide under the heavy pack ice. Her speed is 22 knots. The Russian pilot spoke to his crew. Maintain contact. Do not lose her. If the Americans move toward our surface group, we are authorized to drop the torpedoes. Ensure the fire control solution is active. 5:15 in the morning. The strategic buildup was complete. Every available asset in the Northern Fleet and the United States Second Fleet was now concentrated in a 50-mile circle. This was the maximum point of tension. Both sides had committed their firepower to a patch of ice that held no value. Inside the USS Indiana, Commander Miller heard the sonobuoys hitting the water. The sound was like a constant rain on a tin roof. He knew the sky above him was full of ice. He knew that the Russian surface ships were closing the gap. Miller spoke to his executive officer. They are boxing us in. The Russians think we are the aggressor. If we do not break out of this circle in the next 15 minutes, someone is going to lose their nerve. The executive officer looked at the sonar display. Sir, the anomaly. It is still there. We are moving away from it, but the sensors on the sonobuoys are starting to flicker. It is happening again. Miller looked at the power levels. They were steady for now, but the atmospheric pressure was changing. On the surface, the wind began to howl at 60 miles per hour. A massive Arctic storm was moving in. It would mask the sounds of combat. It would make a mistake even more likely. The two fleets were now within 10 miles of each other. The Russian frigates had their missile bays open. The American destroyers had their Aegis systems locked on every flying object in the sky. The trap was set. The world was 1 minute away from the first shot. 5:30 in the morning. The Beaufort Sea. Inside the Russian frigate Admiral Kasatonov, the air was cold and smelled of ozone. The lights in the Combat Information Center had been switched to a deep and bloody red. The weapons officer stared at his console. His face was pale in the glow of the screen. The USS Indiana was no longer a mystery. It was a solid red icon on his display. The fire control computer showed a 100% probability of a hit. The officer looked at the captain. His hands were shaking. He pointed at the screen. The officer spoke. "Captain, we have the lock. The American is trapped against the continental shelf. Give the order." The captain did not speak immediately. He looked at the radar display. 3 American destroyers were less than 5 miles away. They were painted on his screen like a pack of wolves. Their fire control radars were already locked onto his bridge. He knew the cost. If he launched his torpedoes, he would be destroyed within seconds. But his orders from the Northern Fleet were absolute. He was to defend the zone at all costs. 5:31 in the morning. Inside the USS Indiana, the active sonar from the Russian fleet was hitting the hull like a hammer against a bell. It was a physical vibration that rattled the deck plates. It was the sound of a predator closing in. The sonar supervisor looked at Commander Miller. His voice was a shout over the ringing of the hull. "Sir, they have a solid lock. We cannot break it. We are too shallow to hide." Miller looked at the weapons panel. His face was a mask of professional calm. Flood tubes 1 through 4. Preset the Mark 48 advanced capability torpedoes for active homing. Target the frigate. If they fire, we take them with us. This is not a drill. The executive officer nodded. Tubes flooded. Doors open. We are ready. 5:32 in the morning. High above the ice. The American Pate Poseidon was in a steep bank. The pilot saw the Russian Bear aircraft closing the distance on his infrared camera. The radio crackled with the voice of the controller at North American Aerospace Defense Command. Guardian 1. You are authorized to defend the Indiana. If the Russian aircraft launches any weapon, engage and destroy. The pilot gripped the flight stick. Copy. We have a lock on the Bear. The Sidewinder missile is armed and seeking. The Russian pilot saw the warning lights on his display. He knew the American was behind him. He did not flinch. He reached for the lever that controlled the bomb bay. He pulled it. The cold Arctic air rushed into the fuselage at 400 miles per hour. The internal racks began to rotate. 5:33 in the morning. The world was on the edge of a total collapse. In Washington, the president was being told that the first shot was seconds away. In Moscow, the Kremlin had authorized a nuclear response if the Northern Fleet was neutralized. Every ship in the Arctic was a target. Every sailor was a ghost waiting to happen. The sonar pings in the water reached a fever pitch. The engines of the ships were screaming at full power. The ice groaned and shattered under the pressure of the wakes. The Russian captain on the frigate took a deep breath. He spoke into the ship-wide intercom. His voice was steady. For the motherland. Launch. His finger moved to the red button. He pressed it down. The pneumatic system hissed. The torpedo left the tube. 5:34 in the morning. The Russian torpedo had just cleared the launch tube. Its small electric motor began to whine as the propeller blades bit into the Arctic water. On the bridge of the Admiral Kasatonov, the weapons officer waited for the secondary ignition. It never came. A massive pillar of white light erupted from the sea floor. It was not an explosion. There was no sound. There was no shockwave. It was a column of pure, non-thermal energy that turned the black water into a cathedral of blinding light. It originated from the exact coordinates where the anomaly had first appeared. Inside the USS Indiana, every screen went black. The blue tactical lighting died instantly. The low hum of the nuclear reactor, the heart of the ship, simply stopped. The silence was absolute and terrifying. For the first time in its history, the most advanced submarine in the American Navy was a hollow steel tube drifting in the dark. Commander Miller gripped the armrests of his chair. He could not see his own hands. Report. Emergency lighting. Manual override. The executive officer responded from the darkness. His voice was trembling. Sir, we have nothing. The backup batteries are dead. The secondary bus is fried. We are losing depth control. 600 feet above the water, the situation was worse. The American Pate Poseidon and the Russian Bear aircraft were both hit by the same invisible wave. Their jet engines and turboprops seized. The sophisticated avionics that kept them in the air vanished. The American pilot looked at his co-pilot. The cockpit was dead. There was no radio. There was no radar. There was no horizon. They were falling toward the ice at 400 miles per hour. The engines are out, the pilot said. He pulled the manual flight controls. They were sluggish. We are going down. On the surface of the ocean, the Russian frigate and the American destroyers were suddenly silent. Their powerful engines had cut out. Their radars, which had been locked on each other seconds ago, were now cold pieces of metal. The torpedo that had been fired toward the Indiana drifted aimlessly. Its internal computer was a piece of melted silicon. Then, the light began to move. The pillar of energy did not fade. It expanded. It pushed against the ice from below. The massive sheets of frozen seawater, some of them 10 feet thick, began to shatter and rise. A circle of open water, 2 miles wide, appeared in the middle of the pack ice. A massive, dark shape began to emerge from the center of the light. It was not a ship. It was not a submarine. It was a geometric form that defied military classification. It was perfectly smooth. It was blacker than the Arctic night, and it was rising through the water with a speed that ignored the laws of fluid dynamics. Every sailor on every ship watched through manual binoculars. Every pilot fought to keep their falling aircraft level. No one spoke. The war that had been seconds away was forgotten. The weapons that were meant to destroy nations were now useless toys. It did not stop. It rose into the freezing air. It hovered for a single second above the broken ice. The morning was no longer cold. A wave of heat followed the light. The ice continued to melt. The water began to boil. Commander Miller felt the Indiana lurch. The submarine was being pushed upward by a massive displacement of water. He could hear the hull groaning under the pressure. "Hold on," Miller shouted into the dark. The world was shifting. The rules of engagement had been rewritten by something that did not acknowledge them. 5:35 in the morning. Inside the USS Indiana. The submarine was rolling 30 degrees to port. In the absolute darkness, men were thrown against the bulkheads. The air was growing heavy. Without the ventilation system, the carbon dioxide levels began to rise. Commander Miller felt the weight of his own body pressing into the command chair. He reached for a heavy flashlight clipped to the side of the console. He clicked it on. The beam of light was a narrow spear in the gloom. Miller shouted to his crew, "Damage control, manual depth control, now!" The executive officer crawled toward the manual depth station. His breathing was ragged. "Sir, the digital depth gauges are dead. I am using the analog needle." "What does it say?" Miller asked. 150 feet and rising. "The water displacement is pushing us up. We are going to hit the ice." Miller looked at the overhead hull. "The ice is melting. Look at the temperature sensor." The executive officer looked at a mechanical dial on the wall. The needle was moving rapidly. It climbed from 28 degrees to 70 degrees in less than 10 seconds. The water around the submarine was heating up. The massive sheets of Arctic ice were not just breaking, they were dissolving. 5:38 in the morning. On the surface, Captain Orlov stood on the bridge wing of the Admiral Kasatonov. He did not need binoculars. The object was hovering only 500 meters away. It was a perfect black diamond. It was nearly 300 meters long. It reflected no light. Even the morning sun seemed to disappear into its surface. There was no sound of an engine. There was no heat from a thruster. There was only a low, rhythmic vibration that Orlov felt in his chest. The captain looked toward the horizon. 3 miles away, the American destroyer USS Arleigh Burke was visible. It was dead in the water. He could see the American sailors standing on their deck. They were not at their guns. They were looking at the sky. The Russian weapons officer stepped onto the bridge. His voice was a whisper. "Captain, the fire control computer is back. It rebooted itself. We have a lock on the object." Orlov did not look at him. "Do not fire." "But sir, it is an intruder. It has neutralized our fleet." Orlov pointed at the black diamond. "Look at the water. It is not moving. There is no wake. There is no turbulence. We are playing with fire. If that thing wanted us dead, we would have vanished 3 minutes ago. Tell the crew to stand down. Do not point a single sensor at that object." 5:42 in the morning. The two aircraft, the Pate and the Bear, were no longer falling. As they reached 5,000 feet, their engines suddenly sputtered to life. The electrical systems flickered and stayed on. Both pilots regained control of their planes within seconds of hitting the water. They did not resume their hunt. They began to circle the anomaly at a safe distance. Inside the Pate, the mission commander spoke into the radio. "Control. This is Guardian 1. We have regained power. The object is currently at altitude 0. It is hovering. I repeat, it is hovering. We are seeing massive thermal signatures from the water below it. The ice is gone." The controller responded from Colorado. "Copy. All units are ordered to maintain a 5-mile buffer zone. Do not engage. Do not illuminate with radar. We are attempting to establish communication with the Northern Fleet. We are declaring a temporary ceasefire." 5:45 in the morning. The black diamond began to change. The perfectly smooth surface started to ripple like liquid. It became a deep, glowing violet. Then, it moved. It did not accelerate like a rocket. It did not tilt or bank. It simply shifted its position. One moment, it was at sea level. The next, it was at 32,000 feet. It moved 6 miles in a fraction of a second. There was no sonic boom. There was no trail. Commander Miller felt the Indiana breach the surface. The submarine bobbed in the warm, open water. He climbed the ladder to the bridge and popped the hatch. He smelled salt and a strange, metallic scent like ozone. He looked up. The violet light was fading into the upper atmosphere. The object was gone. The executive officer climbed up behind him. "Sir, the Russians are moving." Miller looked at the frigate. The Russian ship was turning away. It was not a tactical maneuver. It was a retreat. "They are as scared as we are," Miller said. 5:50 in the morning. The Beaufort Sea. The USS Indiana remained on the surface. The water around the black hull was still steaming. The thick ice that had dominated the landscape for centuries was gone within a 2-mile radius. It had been replaced by a perfectly circular pool of dark, warm water. Commander Miller stood on the bridge. He held a pair of manual binoculars. He was looking at the Russian frigate, the Admiral Kasatonov. The Russian ship was less than 3 miles away. It was no longer moving at combat speed. Its weapons were still visible, but the turret of the main gun was centered. The missile bay doors were closing. It was the international signal of a stand down. Inside the Indiana, the lights were flickering back to a steady glow. The engineers reported that the mysterious power drain had vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The executive officer climbed onto the bridge. He looked at the steam rising from the water. "Sir, the sonar is back, but there is nothing to track. The anomaly is gone. The sea floor is quiet. It is as if nothing was ever there." Miller lowered his binoculars. "Except for the fact that we are sitting in a swimming pool in the middle of the North Pole. Tell the radio room to open a channel on the international distress frequency. I want to speak to the Russian captain." 6 o'clock in the morning. The radio crackled with static before a voice came through. The English was heavily accented, but clear. "This is the Admiral Kasatonov. To the American commander. We are receiving your signal. Miller took the handset. This is Commander Miller of the United States Navy. We are observing your withdrawal. We have no intention of engaging. I am requesting a status check. Did your vessel sustain damage from the light? There was a long pause. The sound of the wind was the only thing on the line. The Russian captain, Viktor Orlov, responded. Commander, our systems are recovering. We have no casualties. We witnessed the departure of the object. We have confirmed it was not a weapon of the United States. Is this correct? That is correct, Miller said. We thought it was yours. It belongs to no one, Orlov replied. His voice sounded older. Tired. We are moving to recover our aircraft. The Bear is low on fuel. We will maintain a distance of 10 nautical miles. We suggest you do the same. Agreed, Miller said. Safe travels, Captain. 6:15 in the morning. The tension that had nearly broken the world began to bleed away. It was replaced by a profound and heavy confusion. It was replaced by a profound and heavy confusion. On the surface and below the ice, dozens of crews were performing the same tasks. They were checking for damage. They were rebooting computers. They were trying to make sense of a reality that had been shattered in less than 10 minutes. Inside the Combat Information Center of the Indiana, the technicians were reviewing the last few seconds of recorded data. The footage from the periscope was played back on the main screen. It showed the black diamond rising. It showed the moment the light turned violet. The sonar supervisor pointed at a frequency graph. Sir, look at this. Right before the object moved, it sent out a burst of data. It was not a radar pulse. It was a mathematical sequence. It was broadcasting on every frequency at once, including our internal secure lines. Miller leaned in. What was the sequence? It was the prime numbers. 1 through 100. Over and over. It was a greeting, or a warning. Miller looked at the screen. The Arctic was returning to its natural state. The wind was picking up. The temperature was dropping. Soon, the warm water would freeze over again. The evidence of what happened would be buried under new ice. It was a signature, Miller whispered. It wanted us to know it was intelligent. And it wanted us to know how small we are. The commander looked at the tactical plot. The Russian icons were moving east. The American icons were moving west. The war had been canceled by a force that did not care about their borders or their ideologies. The world had been saved. But no one felt like a winner. 6:30 in the morning. The Beaufort Sea. The American Pate Poseidon aircraft remained on station. Its crew watched the thermal sensors as the massive pool of open water began to steam in the sub-zero air. The dark circle was a scar on the face of the Arctic. The mission commander looked at the recorded data one last time. The object was gone. There was no radar trace. There was no thermal wake in the upper atmosphere. It had simply transitioned out of the visible spectrum. The sensor technician spoke into the intercom. Sir, the Russian Bear is turning for home. They are at 30% fuel. They are no longer painting us with their weather radar. It is over. The commander nodded. Copy. Bring us around to bearing 200. We are heading back to Fairbanks. Notify the Indiana that we are leaving the overhead. 6:45 in the morning. Inside the USS Indiana. The submarine was preparing to dive. The deck was cleared. The lookouts had descended from the bridge. Commander Miller stood in the control room. He watched the ballast tank indicators. The air was pressurized. The ship felt heavy and real again. The supernatural light and the impossible silence of the blackout felt like a fever dream. But the data on the hard drives was real. The executive officer approached with a tablet. Sir, we have established a secure satellite link with Pacific Fleet Command. They want a full download of the acoustic data from the first contact. They are asking if we can confirm the Russian involvement in the electromagnetic pulse. Miller looked at the screen. He saw the face of an admiral 3,000 miles away. The admiral looked like he wanted someone to blame. Tell them negative, Miller said. The pulse originated from a point on the seafloor that neither we nor the Russians could reach. I am filing a report that states both vessels were victims of the same phenomenon. If we try to blame Moscow for this, we are lying to ourselves. And we are ignoring a much bigger problem. The executive officer hesitated. They are not going to like that report, sir. I do not care what they like, Miller said. I care about the truth. We were nearly at war over a shadow. We need to find out whose shadow it was. 7 o'clock in the morning. The Russian frigate Admiral Kasatonov, Captain Orlov, stood on his bridge. He watched the last of the American destroyers disappear over the horizon. The Arctic sun was low and weak. It cast long, distorted shadows across the broken ice. The heaters on the ship were working again. The crew was moving with the mechanical efficiency of professional sailors. But their eyes were different. They moved with the caution of men who had seen the end of the world and survived by accident. The political officer stepped beside Orlov. He held a secure folder. Captain, the Admiralty has issued a directive. All logs from the last 6 hours are to be seized. The crew is to be briefed on a new narrative. We encountered a massive underwater gas release that caused sensor malfunctions. There was no object. Orlov looked at the man. He felt a flash of cold anger. A gas release. Is that what melted 2 miles of pack ice in 10 minutes? Is that what stopped a nuclear reactor? It is the official record, the officer said. It is for the stability of the state. Orlov turned back to the sea. He knew what the Americans would do. They would do the same. They would classify the truth. They would hide the data in vaults. They would pretend the world was still a place they controlled. But he knew better. He had felt the vibration in his chest. He had seen the violet light. The ice will grow back, Orlov said quietly. But the water is different now. The Russian frigate increased speed. It moved toward the east, toward the safety of the Russian coast. Behind it, the steam from the warm pool was beginning to freeze. The circle was closing. The Arctic was reclaiming its silence. The crisis had ended, but the mystery was just beginning. 3 days later, Washington, District of Columbia. The Pentagon was quiet in the early hours of the morning. Inside a windowless room 5 floors below the surface, a group of senior analysts sat in total silence. They were staring at a high-resolution image projected onto the wall. It was a still frame from the periscope of the USS Indiana. It showed the black diamond hovering above the steam of the Arctic. It looked like a hole cut into the fabric of the sky. A senior intelligence officer tapped a key on his laptop. A graph appeared next to the image. It showed 2 overlapping waves of sound. One was blue, the other was red. This is the acoustic data from the first contact, the officer said. The blue line is the American electrical signature, 60 Hertz. The red line is the Russian signature, 50 Hertz. They are perfectly synchronized. The object was not just mimicking our ships. It was using our own power grids to create a resonance. It turned the hulls of our submarines into giant tuning forks. A 4-star general leaned forward. Why? Was it a weapon? The officer shook his head. If it was a weapon, we would not be sitting here. Our engineers have reviewed the power surge data. The object was not attacking the reactors. It was jump-starting itself. It used the combined energy of the Indiana and the Severodvinsk to initiate its departure sequence. We provided the spark. The general looked at the image of the object and the broadcast. The prime numbers, 1 through 100, the officer said. It was the simplest way to say, I am here, I am intelligent, and I am not from here. 3 days later, Moscow. Inside a dacha outside the city, the director of the Federal Security Service met with the Admiral of the Northern Fleet. They sat in a room that had been swept for listening devices 3 times that morning. On the table between them was a copy of the report from Captain Orlov. It had been stamped with the highest level of classification in the Russian Federation. The Admiral spoke in a low voice. Orlov is a good officer. He is not prone to fantasies. He says the object moved without inertia. He says his weapons were physically locked by an external source. He believes we were allowed to survive. The director lit a cigarette. The smoke drifted into the light of a single desk lamp. The Americans have reached out through the back channels. They are suggesting a joint classification. They want to bury the data. They want to tell the world that there was an underwater seismic event. The Admiral frowned. We were seconds away from a nuclear exchange. Our fleets were ready to destroy each other. And now we are going to pretend it was a gas leak. Yes, the director said. Because the alternative is to admit that we are no longer the masters of our own territory. If the people knew that a single object could neutralize our entire northern fleet in 10 minutes, the state would lose its authority. We cannot admit to being helpless. The admiral looked out the window at the falling snow. And what if it comes back? Then we will pray that it still needs our electricity to leave, the director replied. 10 o'clock in the morning. The White House. The President of the United States picked up a secure telephone. It was a line that was rarely used. It connected directly to the Kremlin. The call lasted exactly 4 minutes. No notes were taken. No recordings were made. But when the president hung up the phone, the orders were issued immediately. All satellite footage of the Beaufort Sea from that morning was to be deleted. All sonar logs were to be scrubbed. The two greatest military powers on Earth had found common ground. It was not based on peace. It was based on a shared and terrifying realization. They were like children playing with wooden swords in the shadow of a mountain. The Arctic was silent once again. The ice was freezing over the warm pool. The scars were healing, but the records would remain in the darkest vaults of two nations. The day the world almost ended was now a secret that both sides were desperate to keep. 1 month later, 9 o'clock in the morning, the Pentagon. The final strategic assessment was printed on a single sheet of paper. It did not contain technical diagrams. It did not list casualties or damage costs. It was a summary of a reality that the Joint Chiefs of Staff were still struggling to accept. The document was titled Project Blue Ice. It was the only physical evidence that the events of that morning in the Arctic had ever occurred. Commander Robert Miller sat in a small, windowless office in the basement of the E-Ring. He was no longer in uniform. He wore a plain gray suit. His command of the naval warship had ended 2 weeks early. The official reason was a medical leave of absence. The unofficial reason was that he knew too much. He had spent the last 30 days being interviewed by psychologists, physicists, and intelligence officers. They all asked the same questions. They all wanted to know what he felt when the light turned violet. Miller looked at the report on the desk. He knew that thousands of miles away, a foreign military captain was likely sitting in a similar room in the foreign capital. They were the only two men who truly understood how close the world had come to an end. They were the only ones who had seen the Black Diamond up close. The report concluded that the anomaly was not a threat in the traditional sense. It was not an invasion. It was not a reconnaissance mission. It was a transit. The Arctic seafloor had been used as a refueling station. The two most advanced naval warships on the planet had been nothing more than a convenient source of energy. We were not the protagonists of the story. We were the background noise. 10:15 in the morning, the Arctic Ocean. The circle of open water had finally frozen over. A fresh layer of snow covered the ice, hiding the jagged edges where the sea had once boiled. The temperature had returned to 40 degrees below zero. To a satellite passing overhead, the region looked exactly as it had for 10,000 years. It was a vast, white silence. But beneath the ice, the water was different. The sonar sensors that remained on the seafloor were still recording a faint, rhythmic pulse. It was too low for a human to hear. It was a vibration that existed at the very edge of acoustic physics. It was a remnant of the broadcast, a final echo of the prime numbers. The military analysis was clear. The balance of power had been permanently shifted. The foreign military forces and the domestic military forces had spent 70 years and trillions of dollars to achieve dominance over the oceans. They had built ships that could see through the dark and missiles that could strike from across the globe. But in 10 minutes, all of that technology had been rendered obsolete by a single object that did not even recognize them as a threat. Miller stood up and walked to the door. He knew he would never command a ship again. He knew the naval warship would be stripped and studied until every bolt was accounted for. But he also knew something the generals would never admit. The greatest danger was not the object itself. The danger was our own pride. We had almost destroyed the world because we could not imagine something that did not care about our borders. Final thought. The Arctic remains the most mysterious place on Earth. It is a frontier that we pretend to control with our steel hulls and our digital maps. But the events of that morning proved that we are only guests in the deep. The ocean is not a battlefield. It is a vast and ancient space that holds secrets far older than our civilizations. As the sun set over the Defense Headquarters facility, the file on Project Blue Ice was placed into a heavy steel safe. The door was locked. The combination was changed. The official story of a seismic event was released to the press. The world moved on. But in the dark, beneath the ice, the pulse continued. Modern warfare is decided not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. We survived because two men saw the truth in the dark. We survived because the thing in the water was already finished with us. The morning was finally quiet, and for now, it would stay that way.